In this video, we'll talk about how to configure the screen nodes. Okay, to configure the screen nodes within a workflow, just click on the node. It opens up the screen in full view. Now, what you have is you have all the components that you can use in the screen on the left and all the configurations which are present on the right. We'll go through this one by one. Before we get into the individual components, there are some configurations which are applicable to the screen itself. For example, this screen is called first screen by default. I can probably call this summary. Okay, so now the screen is called summary. And you can also specify permissions. You have obviously the option to delete. That means it will delete the entire screen. And you have certain permissions. So permissions are basically what you want to allow in this when a task is in this particular screen. Like for example, let's say somebody is using this task with the files, or I want to also show the location of a customer. So here, customer location. Now, when the person is using the task, you actually see that the location gets changed from your backend. And you would want to update this task dynamically via, let's say, an API or through some other configurations. Now, in some cases, you might want to allow this kind of update. In some cases, you might not want to allow this kind of updates. So what are the updates you allow or disallow is what is configured in permissions. Update generally controls any update to any of the data points with respect to the particular task. Update team allows you to reassign the allows or disallows you to reassign the task from one user to another when they are working on it. If you don't want to allow reassign when somebody is working on a task, you simply disable it and you will not be able to reassign. Similarly, there is something called update time slots. So each task is scheduled for a specific time, and if you don't want to allow the schedule to be changed, you can simply disable this. This is what they actually do. The last one is onload automation. So this is any automation you want to run when the screen is actually loaded every time somebody opens this task. We will see more about onload automations in the future videos. Now coming to components. The components are how you actually design your screen. As you already saw what we did with this map component, all you have to do is just drag and drop. Let's say I want to do a signature. I just drag and drop in specific locations where I want to drop. And once I drop, I have a few configurations. The configurations are split into two sections. One is mainly how we deal with data. So this data differs from one component to another. Like for example, when you look at a signature component, we have a label. Currently it's called signature label. I can change this to customer signature. And second, data field. So the signature, whatever the user collects, is not saved anywhere within the system. What you do here is you choose a data field, your data in your database, where the signature needs to be stored. So all the possible data fields will be listed here. In our case, we don't have any fields yet. So we can always create one. So I'll call it customer signature. And all I have to do is just hit create. So the next time, let's say a different component you want to choose, the signature data field becomes a possible option. Similarly, when we come to, let's say, this is a file upload component, it has different configurations. It has a label, it has a subtext, it has save data field. It also has something called minimum count, maximum count, read only, a lot of these options. So I can say things like identity proof. I can enable the visibility of this subtext option and say make sure it's clear. I can save it to a data field, and I can even use a default file source. So if before the customer actually uploads, you can by default show a default document. That is also possible. You not only have to give this source manually, you can also choose from your data field if you already have. We will see more about data fields in the future videos. Minimum count basically says what is the minimum number of files that need to be updated for the user to proceed. If there is, in this case, it is 0, that means the user need not upload any documents and still proceed ahead. But if it is 1, the user mandatorily needs to upload at least 1 document, 2, 3, and so on. Read only basically says that the user can only view the document that is uploaded. The user cannot upload new documents or delete the documents that have been created. And finally, there is automations. So automation is the ability for you to run an automation when something gets updated in each of these components. We will see more about automations in the future videos, but they basically let you run some dynamic logic when each of these components are updated. Now, against each of these, you also have an option to use the data that you have already stored. Like for example, let me have a text component, and here I would say hello, good morning. This is me simply entering a text. But let's say I want to not just say hello, but I want to use something dynamic. That means the name of the user. I can access that data from my data source. So I click on data, I choose a logged in user, and I choose a name of the user here. So I can also use some data from the company records. I can also use some data from the task records. Okay, but in this case, I'll use name. So in this case, what happens is, so we will be able to see the hello Bala, good morning. So that's how you'll actually see. Now this is one way of doing this. You also have a much more powerful option if you want to indeed run some complex things. Let's say you want to get the current time from the system and show something like this. That is simply not possible through data or by manually entering this data. So that's where Zorp provides you an option called writing an expression. So this opens up a simple coding interface which is which is run on JavaScript. If you need some complex logic that needs to be done, in this case showing a simple date, but it could be more dynamic evaluations and other things or scripts you want to run. In those scenarios, this interface becomes quite useful. So this is how you configure the screens in Zorp. Before I close, there is one last thing. There are some basic design elements that are also present. For example, in the text component, by default, there is a border that is shown. I can disable that border by closing this border. So I'll not see the border anymore. Similarly, I also have some option to show what is the size of these texts. Like you can change it to medium, small, large. I can also change their colors. So all of these things are actually possible, and it will help you to dynamically or even statically show the information in different ways to your customer. Hopefully this was helpful.